Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. All right, it's a beautiful Monday morning, and I hope that you had a good night of rest and are ready for a good week. And some of you have already had a good class and only have 4 more of those yet, so time is flying by. So do your best in that happy rudiments learning and whatever else happens during first period. Paul very clearly forbids singing in Ephesians 5:19 and Colossians 3:16, since he says and teaches that they are to speak to one another and teach one another with psalms and spiritual songs, and if anyone should sing, he should sing and give thanks in his heart. Whatever we are not taught by clear passages or examples must be regarded as forbidden, just as if it were written, "This do not, sing not." For a chapel series this week, we are going to consider this quotation as a point of departure, as a launching point for what is going to be what shall I say? Well, I'll tell you later, is what I will say. And this morning's chapel is essentially setting the landscape for the week and what is going on here in chapels. And I hope that that will be clear what I am saying and what I am not saying, and so forth. So we consider this morning that in Christian church denominations, when we consider music traditions, so the music that is in the worship experience, the worship service, we're thinking about primarily Christians assembling on a Sunday morning and making music. What's going on there? Where did that come from? Should it keep going? How do we defend it if it should be defended? How do we steward and take care of tradition? How do we advance a tradition without doing violence, both to the tradition and to our brothers and sisters in Christ? And sometimes, and this is what I've seen, and you might disagree with me. In fact, I expect that you will disagree with me on some things this week, and I invite input on that. All right, consider the Christian church denominations, music traditions there, and how you might approach it if you would think of yourself primarily as a theologian, or if you would think of yourself primarily as an artist. Now, the goal, of course, is integration. We would like to have artist theologians who are fully integrated. You might think about this perhaps in terms of head people and heart people, although that's not entirely true. There are artists who are more head and theologians who are more heart. But to a certain extent, what I'm talking about when I say theologian is I'm talking about the ideas. I'm thinking about the thoughts about the nature of God and how he is to be understood and how he is to be approached and all of this. And if you would think of a person in your congregation who might most easily slip under the title of theologian, it might be your pastor, perhaps. Not necessarily, but that's kind of the thing we think about. On the artist side, maybe a little more heart, maybe more feely, maybe more, and I use this word in a way that I wish there was a better word for this meaning of the word, but sensual. In other words, aware of the senses. I don't mean it in a provocative kind of way. I mean it in a way that the sounds and the sights, and in some Christian faith traditions, the smells and the touch. I am unapologetic. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say is that the things about the Christian faith tradition that move me the most are the ones that I can touch. And I'm thinking specifically of communion. But also, during my time in Ontario, I served as a deacon in a Mennonite church for about 12 years, and one of my favorite deacon activities, this was when I was youth pastor. After I was not youth pastor, the next youth pastor got to do this, but one of my favorite activities was baptisms. I loved it so much. With baptism by sprinkling, but I was more of the pouring kind of guy, and I just like to give her, because that was just great. I love the physicality. Like we don't. I feel as an artist that I don't get enough of it. Okay. Quakers, on the other hand, that's way too much. That's like you don't need that at all. No baptism, no communion. There are things about the Quaker tradition that I love, but that's not one of them. Well, that might be the other side, the artist side. And as you think about music and the intersection of your faith tradition and the music of your church, we can look over the scope of Christian music in over several thousand years, but you can also look over in just the past 100 years and see that there can often be significant conflict between the head and the heart, between perhaps the theologian and the artist in terms of music in church. We know about worship wars and the differences in what people like and what people want versus what people are told they should like or what they should want. And it's a little bit of a bunny trail, but I suggest that if you need to be told what you should like, then the thing that you should like is not pulling its weight, because it should tell you itself. Well, I'm a musician. I'm a composer, conductor, arranger, editor. I'm an instructor and a lecturer and a chapeler apparently this morning. And those are things that are more the intersection of my life and the world that I'm in. But I have thought about theology, and I have spent time in church administration, and so I feel like I, in some ways, have a sense of this continuum, this head-heart thing, this the way that we think about it, and some of the conflicts that arise musically in our churches from that. In 2017, in my then hometown of Waterloo, Ontario, Paul Westermeyer, who's a professor of church music at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, made an observation during a conference of the Hymn Society of the United States and Canada. He made the astute observation that church musicians, by necessity, quote, tend to be denominationally promiscuous, end quote. Now, that word has some multiple definitions, and I'm using this one, not the other one. And that is demonstrating or implying an undiscriminating or unselective approach. In other words, if you just like all kinds of frozen desserts, even if they don't say ice cream on them, you might be considered dessert promiscuous. I don't know. I just made that up. Like you don't care if it has any cream in it or not. If it's frozen yogurt, if it's ice cream, doesn't matter. Give it to me. Bring it. That's just while the discerning one will shop for ice cream and will note that they picked up something that says frozen dessert and they put it back. Yeah? So that's maybe the theologian approach. I'm not sure. Now, why would an artist be denominationally promiscuous? First of all, denominationally means that this person is not. It's not necessarily a statement about contentment, but it's a statement about opportunity and saying, well, you know what? Here's this group of people and they're doing this thing and I see it and that looks interesting, or that looks helpful, or that looks fun, or that looks beautiful, or that, and I shouldn't be saying looks because this is a music art, I should be saying sounds, because by the way, there is no music in the hymnals. Did you know that? Music is something that comes in your ear. We have notation, we have a score, we have notes and things, but music does not happen until it is heard. That's just me being stubborn about that point. Well, why would an artist be denominationally promiscuous? This could include survival, it could include mutual support, an understanding of past and current trends in church music, but also the debt that we owe to our brothers and sisters of the past and present in many faith traditions who have stewarded and advanced so many aspects of the music that we appreciate and steward ourselves today. We consider that we are the receptors of a long line of church musicking. That's a word now. Someone wrote a book about it. It has a K in it. M-U-S-I-C-K-I-N-G. Musicking, the act of making music. A long tradition. And sometimes many traditions coming together in this act of musicking. If we go back to 1054, time of the Great Schism in the church between the East and the West, the Church of Rome and the Church of Constantinople, Istanbul, which is now the distinction that is most talked about in terms between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. But from the Great Schism of the 11th century to the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century, 500 years, and then including the music coming out of the Protestant Reformation, we have the most change in music in the history of Christian music. And by change, I'm talking about style, I'm talking about the ability to notate it, to preserve it, to pass it on, but also what was notated. Change from Gregorian chant. You know, Gregorian chant dominated the landscape for hundreds of years in church music. Very little change, very little shift in what was going on. It started to change, and these changes came through the School of Notre Dame in Paris is the one where composers developed, for example, that you could have a note, and then you could have another note that was twice as long in duration, or half as long. Mensural notation. This was a new thing in the 12th, 13th century, well, not the 13th, 11th, 12th centuries. These things were new. They didn't happen, in the history of music before that. In Gregorian chant, there were some notes that were longer than others, some were shorter, but how much longer was not defined. It was more of an organic kind of development of sound, that some notes were longer than other notes were. But it did not have meter. This application of meter is something that was developed by a faith tradition that is older than the Anabaptists. It predates us. We have received this tradition. And so I put before you the 1 Corinthians 4, verse 7. But before I read the verse, I want to consider, my son Lucas is around. He's 15. When he was 9, I think, I'm guessing, but it was 8 or 9 that he learned to make scrambled eggs. And he would make scrambled eggs, and they were good enough to eat. They were not bad, actually. And so he would get to work in the kitchen, and he would make scrambled eggs. And he would feed me his scrambled, or I would try them. Now, he could say to me, "Dad, I made some scrambled eggs," right? I mean, that's what he did. But did he? Well, consider, what do you need to make scrambled eggs? You need a knife to get the butter. You need some eggs, chicken. Somebody had a chicken. Then that chicken had an egg, and then, no, wait, I won't get there. There's salt, and there's a whisk, and there's a frying pan, there's a stove, there's electricity or natural gas, something to provide energy to heat the egg. There's kitchen cabinets and lights and the refrigerator and more. And so what did he do? Well, he added the labor. There was some, intelligence that went into that, not creativity, generally speaking. In fact, if somebody says to you, "Do you want some scrambled eggs?" and you say, "Well, will you be creative?" That's not really what we're looking for in scrambled eggs. But so much of that process of my son presenting scrambled eggs to me was by things that were added to his life that he had no control of, no agency, no power. He could not take credit for these things. And so we read 1 Corinthians 4, verse 7, "What do you have," Paul writes, "that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it?" What do you have that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it? So this week we will look at what we have received. And hopefully, a fairly honest look, although it's 1 week, so we can only do so much. This will involve opening space in our collective imagination for receiving things, good things, from church traditions with which we starkly disagree on theological points and points of practice. With an estimated 2.5 billion Christians all over the world, at least nominally so, Christianity is the largest religious group. About 10% live in the United States. The next most country is Brazil. At least this data is about 10 years old, but here we go. With the Catholic Church, around 1.3 billion, or half of the nominal Christians. And by nominal, I'm just saying those who say they are Christian. I'm not saying they're not Christian or are Christian. I'm saying they say they're Christian. It's not a judgment one way or the other. Protestantism, about 1 billion. The Eastern Orthodox Church, 220 million. And it goes down from there to some minor branches. I like to think about Christian denominations and where I can fit in them, and not just denominations as well, but this comes down to the level of Anabaptism. It comes down to the level of a church fellowship, and say, well, I like to think about this mathematically, because you can. There are other ways to do it, but think about fractals, the curve or geometric figure, each part of which has the same statistical character as the whole. So what this means is you have a design, and if you zoom into that design, you would find that that design is made up of the same design. And if you zoomed out, you would find out that that design is one piece of a larger design made up of those designs. So the best thing to say this is broccoli. Okay? So there's a head of broccoli, and you tear off broccoli, just hold it closer to your head and it looks like a head of broccoli. Take off another stem, hold it closer to your head, it looks like a head of broccoli. And you just keep going, like it's broccoli to the bottom. I don't know how else to talk about it. It's fractals, it's that kind of idea. That the more you zoom in, the more it looks like it looked when you were zoomed out. Okay, so different levels of things. Well, what does that have to do with this? I think about this in terms of my church. So I ask you this morning, is Jesus the head of your church? It's a good question to ask. It seems to be an important one, that Christ would be the head of his church. That's if we're using a body analogy similar to what Paul uses. And so then, if Jesus is the head of your church, which I hope he is, then what is your bishop? Like what's he, or what about your elders or pastoral team, or are they the head of your church, or what are they? And so we think about this in terms of these fractal layers. And I like to think of my local congregation, the people to whom I am most accountable, to whom I am most committed, the ones who know me the best, as the first level. This is the first level of Christian relationship, and understanding it is the tightest one. It is the one that is the most likely to be annoying, and actually the most likely to cause pain, because the relationship is the closest. It's annoying because it's people I see every week, except in the summer when I work at music camp. Then I see them every summer. This relationship is where, typically, a church split will start. Sometimes it happens at the next level, which is a fellowship or a conference, which is the second level. Well, okay, who is the head of my church? Well, it looks like maybe the lead pastor or the bishop, kind of. But what about we're part of an affiliation, a bigger thing, a larger group? Some of you are not, that's fine. Just skip that step entirely and go straight to the third level, which is just kind of conservative, Mennonite, Anabaptist, labels, pick one. I mean, they matter. I'm not saying they don't matter. I'm saying that some of you are both and some of you are just one or the other, and, well, not the other. You can't be Mennonite. Anyway. I should have a Venn diagram. But we have this next level, and then there's the higher level of, well, just all Anabaptists. churches. Did you know that conservative Anabaptists are quite a small minority of theological Anabaptism globally? There are more, at least there were 10 years ago, more Mennonites in Africa than in North America. And they would not present in ways that we would see this group presenting, but they are part of the larger Anabaptist church. And the Anabaptist church is a part of the Christian church. There are some people who would write it down on charts would tend to put Anabaptism in with Protestantism, and I don't really have a big problem with that, but that's not the point of the talk this morning, which is a part of the Christian church. And it is the Christian church that, as its head, has Jesus. But what role do we play? What role do we have congregationally within our fellowship, conference, alliance, affiliation? Not all, Paul writes, in a church have the same gifts. And this is the important part of the fractal conversation, so I hope you don't miss it. And that is that Paul says in the body there are different functions, different roles. If the eye shall say, and so forth. I believe that's true in a physical body. I believe it's true in a local congregation. Where I'm going with the fractal thing is that I think in a fellowship, in a conference, in an alliance, in an order, there are different roles sometimes for different congregations. Some congregations are better at some things than others. For example, I was affiliated with Midwest Mennonite Fellowship for as long as I lived in Ontario, pretty much, and they run a Bible school, Maranatha Bible School. The fellowship does, not the church I was at necessarily. Well, one of the churches that provided a significant amount of teachers to that Bible school was one of the smallest churches. In other words, that was something that they had a higher than average density of Bible school teachers. Does that mean the other churches should say, we're just no good? What are we doing here? Well, they didn't, be sure of that. No, they had other gifts. They had other strengths. Sometimes a strength of a congregation, hear me well, sometimes a strength of a particular congregation in a fellowship is that it has a lot of money. We tend to be critical of the moneyed, and sometimes we should, but how are you going to run that Bible school? How are you going to keep the lights on if there aren't people who are hilarious givers? That's the word for cheerful in the King James. If you look at the Greek, it's God loves a hilarious giver, just like over the top crazy. It's true. Ask John D. That's where I learned it from, so I hope it's true. There are different gifts in a fellowship. Not all congregations have the same strength and have the same role. Likewise, not all affiliations in conservative Anabaptism have the same strength. Some do certain things better than others, and it's true the other way. This is true in Anabaptism in general. The conservative Anabaptist group of the larger Anabaptist group has some strengths that benefit the whole. And it is true the other way as well. And I believe in the context of the Christian church, Anabaptism globally brings something significant, a significant piece in our conversations about peacekeeping, in our conversations about nonviolent love and defenseless faith, in our emphasis on brotherhood care and tending to each other's needs, our barn building, both literally and metaphorically. These are strengths that the Christian church needs. If the hand shall say to the eye, and so forth. And so I ask you, what role does your affiliation play in all Anabaptist churches? How is it unique? What does it bring to the table that benefits that body? Does it bring anything? It should. What role does conservative Anabaptist churches play in the global peace church tradition, and so forth? So when we look at what we do, and I'm going to start to turn this toward musicking, making music in a collective worship service. What is something that we do that is important, that is valuable, that if it isn't done by somebody, it will die? Jesus meant something when he asked for unity in his church. Jesus is the head of my church to the extent that my church, my congregation, is a part of Jesus' church. Is your congregation a part of Jesus' church universal, global, all the way around the world? Are you a part of it? Because Jesus is the head of his church. And he is the head of my congregation to the extent that my congregation, as faithfully as it can, in honesty and humility and with our best foot forward, is a part of the global church of Jesus. Must one single church group have all the strengths? Can we acknowledge the strength of other church groups while continuing to steward our own? What are we good at? Splitting up doesn't count, even if we're good at it. I mean, one thing we're really good at is humanitarian aid. That's something that historically we've just really cared about. Church planting, to some extent, not really urban churches. We're not super good at planting churches in cities. And this is a really sore spot for some people. Like, what's up with us? Let's go. And if you can, great, but have you considered that maybe we're not good at that because we're good at some other things? See, every strength that you have, every strength of your character, every strength of your personality has a shadow side. If you're a prophet, if you can see things that other people can't see, it comes with a shadow side. It comes with the potential to divide, the potential to be arrogant, the potential for others. That applies to everybody. If your strength is mercy and kindness and so forth, that can come with a shadow side. And so I think in this matter, the question of this week, particularly drilling it down to musicking and making music in church, is that what do we have to offer? The church of Jesus. What have we been given with our traditions that we can take care of, that we can tend? I ask you this week to think about this the way we think about a garden and growing vegetables or flowers or grass. Some people are good at growing grass. I used to grow boys, not grass. Pick one. What are we good at growing? Every group adds something positive. Every group has blind spots, and some are worse than others. I think it's not wrong to say that there are certain Christian traditions that are less a friend to grace than others. I think we can say that that's how it looks. But let's look at ourselves. So this week, I tend to mount an apology, not in the normal way we think of apology, but in the third definition of apology, a reasoned argument or writing in justification of something. I intend to mount an apology for the singing that we do in church, how we do it, and why we do it, and that we should keep doing it. For most of you, this is going to be unaccompanied four-part singing. For some of you, this is unison singing. For some of you, this might be something else. But I wish to speak to you in the context of your tradition about stewardship, and to make a justification for doing what we do. And I trust that I'll be heard in good faith. And in places where I say something that's uncomfortable to you, I urge you to seek me out. Or actually, first, just hear what I've said and not what I haven't said. It's easy to read between lines, and I don't wish to speak in ways that are intentionally nebulous or confusing or cloudy or opaque. But do feel free to come to me with questions or concerns. But let's go back to Ephesians 5 and Colossians 3. Paul very clearly forbids singing, since he says and teaches and blah, blah, blah. All right, so how old is this quote? This quote is 500 years old. All right, 1524 in September-ish, I think, so it's not quite 500 years old, coming up on September 5th. And it was written by whom? If you were in Virginia camp, you're not allowed to say. Who wrote this? Dad. Conrad Grebel. Thank you. Grebel was a founder of the Anabaptists who prohibited vocal singing in worship. This was not something that he made up on his own. This also aligned with the teachings of Ulrich Zwingli, but something he cared a lot about. He prohibited vocal singing. The Anabaptists in general disagreed with him on this point and took up singing after he died. And I don't like to talk about things in church change as being a certain number of funerals away, but that one was one funeral away. So why does this matter? This matters because our current singing tradition happened in spite of the work of early Anabaptists. The tradition that we have today came about in spite of the efforts of some early Anabaptists. They worked actively against it. It wasn't a neutral thing, but they worked against it. What do you have that you did not receive? Not just from your mom and your dad and your grandpa and your grandma and great-grandpa, but what have you received from other Christian faith traditions? What do you have musically that you did not receive? Not just as a person in a congregation or as a congregation in an affiliation or as an affiliation among the Anabaptists, but beyond that, we are the recipients of so much culture, so much work, so much scholarship, and so much faithful practice from faith traditions that in other ways sometimes make us really nervous and uncomfortable. We consider this week that music reflects the condition of our culture, our collective hearts. Sure, one's music reflects the condition of one's heart personally, but one's cultural music reflects the condition of one's collective hearts. What is on the inside spills out. There's a logical order to these things. If our hearts are right, our music tends to reflect this. That is disciples who make music. But it works the other way as well. I suggest to you, not suggest, but I'm going to make as firm an apology as I can, that the music that we make then turns around and reinforms and continues to not just maintain, but move forward a singing tradition. Music is more than a reflection. Music is also prophetic. It is also influential. Make no mistake about this point. Composers understand this. This is the difference, by the way, between a theorist and a composer. Music theory, music composition, you say tomato, I say tomato. Well, not really. Music theory is looking back on what was done and describing it, saying this happened, Bach did this, Bach didn't do that, Palestrina did this, Mozart did that. That's theory. Composition is saying, yes, I see that, but I prescribe. But I say unto you, it came out a little more arrogantly than it should have. Composers express what is on their heart, and they compose to persuade the listener that they should feel the same things. There are various pieces of music that I listen to, and I'm deeply moved time and again. I know it's coming. I can look in the score. I can say right here, when this recording gets to this place, I am going to cry. And I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't. What if I just don't? But nope. She's like, holding my daughter. I said, Maya, I said, I'm going to cry soon. Okay, she's fine with that. Well, she wasn't then when it came. I don't think she took me seriously. But anyway, the habits and cultural practices of our collective music making will also make us as well. And that is the point I wish to make this week. That is music that makes us. So we make music, yes, but music also makes us. It's going both ways, and we want to talk about both of those ways this week. Now, did you know that there's not very much a chance, there is now, like it's fixed, but any of you who were born into a conservative Anabaptist culture, and some of you were not, but most of you were. If you were born into the conservative Anabaptist culture, the chances of you being born in there are actually pretty slim. Like globally, you are like 1 out of 40,000 people are considered to be conservative Anabaptists. Now that might seem like maybe you thought the odds would be even longer than that. I'm not sure. But then here's the remarkable thing. The more remarkable thing, perhaps you might say as well, how many of you have been baptized into the Christian church in an Anabaptist setting? I'll just squint. Okay. All right. So lots of people. Good. All right. I didn't see the hands that didn't go up. So what I'm saying is, what are the odds of that? Like long odds that you were even born into it, and then you chose it yet. It's like, way to go. Way to choose it. And then we think, well, actually, yeah, I guess I chose it. I hope I did. But the odds of you choosing it actually were really, really, really quite high after you were born into it. So the odds of being born into it were very low, the odds of choosing it very high, and that sometimes gives us some squirms, like is it the right one? That's not my point this morning. My point this morning is that the reason we have our hearts turned a certain way, in ways of thinking about God, in ways of making music, is because of influence, because our parents did. That's not a bad reason. They did their job, I hope, or they should have, or we try. That's what parents can do, is we try. The expression of other hearts has turned in part our heart toward the beliefs of the church of our parents. And again, that's not true for all of you in this room. For some of you, you have chosen conservative Anabaptism as a shift from the way that you were raised. I applaud that. I wonder what it feels like. It's hard to imagine that. And so we look at this week at our culture in the context of larger Christian culture. I wish to frame this conversation in terms of being a disciple of Jesus. We will look at some of his commands, some of his counsels, that in turn will make us more and more into the image of Christ. How the music that we make and the ways that we make it can be a part of the process of transformation of our mind and of our culture in orders of magnitude, small and great and in between. Some of the commands of Christ we will explore this week in our attempt toward sanctification and Christ-likeness. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father. The command to not be anxious and seek God's kingdom. The command to not despise the little ones. The command to be a servant. The command to love the Lord, and the command to love our neighbor. We want to explore some of these things. How do they work in terms of our musicking? The music that we make, both in church, in school, in the home, in the community, various contexts for this music making. And so, just casting a scope for the week, I'm going to read from Matthew 26. Jesus took a Passover biscuit, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take, eat, that it is my body." And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood, which is to be poured out for many for the remission of sins, the blood which ratifies the covenant. I tell you that I will never again take the produce of the vine till that day when I shall drink the new wine with you in my Father's kingdom." So they sang the hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. Just a little blip in there, so they sang the hymn. Which hymn? I would like to hear it. Was it recorded? Was it written down? What did they sing? We could make some guesses based on the context and what was going on religiously around that time, but we don't know what they sang. But the title of my talks for this week is So They Sang. Well, that's the first part of it. The second part's a little longer. Music making disciples and music making disciples in tradition, education, reconciliation, worship, and human flourishing. Today we looked at history and thought about influence. For tomorrow we want to look at a posture toward Jesus and look at discipleship. On Wednesday, today's singing culture, a look at it as we think about tradition and innovation. Thursday will be the singing culture tomorrow, or the future. Not Friday, but like the future. And that is on education and emulation. How do we teach children? How do we let children teach us? On Friday, we'll look at global culture, themes of reconciliation and human flourishing, and we'll wrap it up Saturday with a posture toward God and a heart of worship. Let us pray. Great God, we thank you that you've been kind to us, that you woke us up this morning to a day of grace. Thank you that your mercies are not consumed and your faithfulness is great. Give us courage for the week and all that is ahead, and may the words of our mouth and the meditation of our heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.